All right. Hey, Cleantechers. We are back with the eighth Cleantech Editors and Reporters Roundtable here. We're 2 days before the long holiday here in the US. Delighted to have this panel back. Suffice to say that a lot has changed since we last convened. The world is quite a bit different, at least here in the US policy world. And I think that's, you don't get a lot of wins in climate solutions progress, but you got a big win since we last convened, courtesy of the US Senate and its mysterious ways. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm sure we'll be talking a good bit about that. But first, I want to introduce our panelists here. We have John Engel from Clarity Events and Renewable Energy World coming back to us. We're really glad he's here. Dan Garino also returning to us from Inside Climate News. We have a Cleantech Editors Reporters Roundtable newbie, Tom Kleckner, coming at us with RTO Insider and Net Zero Insider, and Zach Shahan with Clean Technica and Clean Tech Talk. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Okay, so lightning round. First question, just 1 to 10. How big a deal is the Inflation Reduction Act from a 1 to 10 scale? Zach?
That's hard. Well, within the realms of reality, I give it a 9.
All right, Tom?
I give it a 7.
All right, Dan?
Oh, come on, people. It's 10.
All right. All
Same.
right, John?
Yep, 10.
Okay. I'm going to give it a 10 just because, I've been pushing on the climate boulder for a lot of years, and you don't get wins like this size. So it's really good. Okay. So here's the first substantive question for all of you. What are the 3 biggest things that are going to happen as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act in your view, and why are they the 3 biggest things? Dan, let me start with you.
So I should say there is so much in this bill that my answer here is going to be colored to an extent by the things that I'm paying the most attention to. So one of the things that jumps out to me is the investment tax credit and the various permutations of it. In some ways, kind of the simplification of it. Now, as I say that, I don't know necessarily that that'll end up being what ends up being one of the really big things, but that's definitely something I'm paying attention to and is a very big deal to the people I talk to. The thing that I think may end up actually being a bigger deal, but we just don't know yet, is just the way the various parts of the bill are trying to set up a domestic manufacturing base for so many clean tech components. And then the other thing is the way in which the EV credits are structured and just the existence of the EV credits. And for good or ill, because there is a lot of discussion about how effective those are going to be and the way in which they were done, there's no doubt that they're going to be incredibly significant to that market going forward. So that's my 3.
Okay, Zach, you're 3.
Yeah, the EV ones are extremely, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of interesting factors there that I could talk all day about. But I think the biggest change in the market that I see from my angle, stimulated by the bill, is that it will bring a lot of EV battery mineral mining and processing to the United States. Right now, China accounts for 60 to 100%, depending on the metal you're talking about, of processing of EV battery minerals. And this is a big push to make them, I mean, there's big stuff in here that excludes batteries that rely on that. So I think, and we've already seen some companies indicate they're coming to the US, or they're opening up stuff and planning stuff in the US based on that. I also just think on the solar side, it will just continue to stimulate a massive amount of solar growth. Make more people aware of the benefits of solar. And I lean towards going back to an EV topic, but I'll just go back to an EV topic. I'll leave some of the other stuff. It's not an easy transition for automakers. It's an extremely hard transition. They're surfing on a needle to make this transition. And I think whether it's by stimulating demand, which I don't think really needs that much stimulus at this point, or by giving them some cushion to remain profitable during the transition, And some people are going to criticize it for, oh, this is a giveaway to automakers. Even if you look at it like that, these automakers might crash and the whole industry might have a really hard time transitioning if they weren't given some support like this. So I think, but then there's all kinds of things about, you know, incentives for small batteries and plug-in hybrids that gets into Joe Manchin territory and Toyota having a factory in West Virginia, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Maybe later.
All right, Tom, you're up.
Well, I like the idea of the stable subsidies for the next 10 years or so for solar and wind, and especially for offshore wind, because I think, you know, with it needs help in bringing the price down. I would also go with kind of the help for technologies, anything to do with carbon capture. One reason I would be a 7 is because, you know, I'm kind of carbon capture. We need a lot of work there. We need better technology than we have now. I go back to when I was working for a utility and was out at a coal plant. We were taking 3% of the carbon emissions and using them to produce baking powder. But, you know, there's not really a market for baking powder. And were we to take 100% of those carbon emissions out, you would need a facility that was bigger than the plant itself. So anything to help technology like that. And then I'm big on the EV sales as well. Anything to help the EV market and kind of bring some of that production stateside.
Did I understand you correctly? At one point, your company was selling baking powder with coal ash in it. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay, good. Whew. All right, excellent. All right, John.
Yeah, it's always fun to go last on these trips around the roundtable. It is funny though, as Dan was giving his 3, I made a list of 3 as well. I said certainty, the ITC,
yes.
the 10-year extension. I said simplicity, the transition to a technology neutral tax credit system in the next couple of years, I think is great in simplifying how we incentivize, you know, low carbon electricity generation, where it's not going to be just attached to wind or attached to solar or attached to hydrogen. Can you do it with little carbon? You'll get the credit. So I think that's a positive move here in the next couple of years. And then proactive, it was my 3rd one, with the first industrial policy in the US in generations is already leading to those investments that, you know, I think we all saw the $1 billion announcement by First Solar yesterday that everyone expected was coming, but no one knew when it would come. That they're going to bring on a new factory in the US Southeast in the next couple of years, boost their capacity by 4 gigawatts. So that's all the ones that I don't get to pick. I would say I'm excited about green hydrogen. I think coming into
John is clever, huh?
Yeah, right. I know how to game the system. This is number 2, Zach. Just wait till I get on my 3rd roundtable here. I'll be dangerous. I think the green hydrogen coming into the cost comparison with gray hydrogen with these subsidies is huge for that industry, and will really be a dynamic piece of the energy transition over the next 10, 20 years. In that, you know, we've talked about the hype cycles of green hydrogen over the years, and is it even worth spending our time having the discussions about green hydrogen because it's not going to ever get down on cost? You know, now it's realistic, and you're going to see some real investments, I think, in the coming years. I'll just give one more. You know, the energy community rider that you can stack on top of your ITC PTC, I think is huge. I mean, on some of these brownfield sites, if you're in an energy community that historically oil and gas or coal, you know, you can start getting up to 60-70% of project costs if you pay prevailing wages and you're located in the right place. So, I mean, that's huge. So I think, you know, there are plenty of reasons to be concerned about what the bill maybe didn't address or didn't go far enough with, but I think there's so much to be excited about.
Okay, here's the second substantive IRA question for you. Most of the time, particularly in policy, when you get a really good thing, it comes with some consequences, intended or not. Will the IRA create vulnerabilities for clean economy? And if so, what are they? All right,
Well-
Tom, that's a knowing laugh. We're going to start with you.
Well, I would not call that a laugh, but there are a lot of carrots in the bill. More carrots than sticks, and I wonder whether the carrots might not be enough. Again, it's my a little bit pessimistic, but I'm worried about political pushback or political games that may sidetrack some of this. And I think they could have done more for transmission. That's being with RTO Insider, of course, I'm big on transmission. I think they could have done more for that. I'm not going to push for a national grid or anything like that, but I think they could have done more to help improve the ability to build transmission, whether you're in an RTO or an investor-owned utility.
Okay, Zach?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I almost gave it an 8, so just give Tom a little bit of support. But then I just thought, what's possible in U.S. federal politics, and I mean, I think everyone knows this is more possible than most of us thought. So I would just, I'm gonna highlight that EV issue, which a lot of EV fans have brought up. Basically, you can get a full tax credit for a plug-in hybrid with a very small battery, basically a very small battery. And so there's a bit of concern that it's just a giveaway to companies that are not seriously trying to make the transition, that it will go to cars that do not significantly cut emissions. There's studies out there showing people don't even plug-in hybrids. That depends on a lot of factors. I think in the US, people will mostly plug them in, but still it could, it's sort of it's not a great inclusion. And even if they had a larger size for the plug-in hybrid battery, it would be much better than what it is at. And I hinted at it, but basically Toyota has a lot of sway in West Virginia. They have a factory there, and there's a lot of speculation that this kind of stuff got into the bill because Joe Manchin is reigning prime minister. But the other side of that is, I think the requiring that the EV battery minerals don't come from foreign, I forget the phrase, but foreign countries of concern. Countries of concern, yeah, which is China, Russia, some other country. I mean, this is a big, bold move. And as I said, like lithium, like 60% is processed in China. Cobalt, I think 100% in China. Or graphite is 100% processed in China. Cobalt is like 80%. There's nickel is up there. So basically, you can't get a battery that doesn't have minerals processed in China. And this very aggressively says you have to if you want tax credits, and like that's it. Like it's not like you get less of a tax credit. You get excluded from tax credits if not right away, but in 2024, which is very soon. And that's very, very soon for battery mineral mining and processing industries. So it's very aggressive. I think that's good in the long term, because being completely reliant on what China likes or doesn't like when the market is 50% plus, not 5%, is a big risk for our country. So I think it's good. But a lot of people are concerned that it will kill them, that it kills the EV tax credit, so to speak, that it's like no one's going to be eligible because of this very strict requirement. So I'm going to be fascinating to see how that turns out. But that's getting discussed a lot, especially among Tesla fans who are not thrilled with some of these elements. But
and just note to our viewers, Zach's going to have to step away in a few minutes for about 15, but we're going to have him back. Dan, your thoughts on vulnerabilities, seen or unforeseen?
I think that some of the carbon capture stuff in here, and we saw this coming, not a mile away. We saw this coming many, many miles away. But if you look at just kind of the back of the envelope math for a power plant retrofit using the increased credit, it's a lot of money, and I mean, potentially just this. What's more extreme than eyebrow raising? I don't know. But yeah, I would say that's a significant concern. But for a plant to really make that kind of money, though, they would need to be successfully deploying carbon capture. And we have yet to see anybody do that at a significant scale. So it's but yeah, I would say that's the one a thing that I'm keeping an eye on. Kind of how does this play out? Because I think the increase of carbon capture, the ability to have substantial credits for carbon capture was obviously a big thing for Senator Manchin. You probably don't have a bill without that, but like 10 years from now, you could look back and say, wow, yeah, this led to a ton of money that was spent on projects that didn't end up doing a lot of public good.
Yeah. All right, John, I know you love going last.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. Someone's got to do it. Yeah, I would agree with all those previous answers. I mean, you can talk about a few of those line items that were clearly geared toward Senator Manchin, but if you had to get those in there to get him swayed on a nearly $400 billion bill, I mean, I hate to say it's like there's some necessary evil baked in here that we knew was going to be baked in there, just as Zach pointed out with the West Virginia plan Dan just alluded to just now. I mean, there's some complaints about how blue hydrogen is receiving similar credits as green hydrogen, even though there's some concern about the efficacy of capture and all this stuff. But I don't know. I guess the one thing I would speak to, I don't know if it directly answers the question, but maybe a false sense of security, that with the credits in hand, that the job is done. I think it's great that the policy is there and the incentives are in place and we have all this certainty. There's going to be a lot of work that has to happen at the state and local level, a lot of commissions and a lot of boards, and people are going to be fighting that good fight on siting and permitting for the next decade pretty hard. So I think that's a question. I think there's also a question of how, with these credits in hand, that affects the margins of these projects. Obviously, either developers can do more projects or build bigger or whatever. How are those savings distributed? If that's the right way to phrase this, is it going to go down to, electricity prices? I don't know. I doubt it. Are utilities going to take advantage of this in restructuring their resource planning and the projects that they've already contracted for? Are you going to see suppliers adjusting prices? So there's a myriad of things that could fall into, we're going to take advantage of this. But I think, I always want to cap this off by saying this is a transformational piece of legislation, not just for the people who are physically getting the credits. It's all of us. It's us in trade media. It's clean tech PR firms like you, Mike. It's everyone that is even tangentially connected to this industry has room to benefit from its promise.
So, John, you touched on this, but Dan and Tom, I'm going to perhaps put you on the spot a little bit. I was surprised that neither one of you offered up what the Brookings Institution says is the #1 impediment to renewable scaling, which is the permitting process. And I've had a reason to start looking at this lately, and it looks like, in addition to the community engagement challenges that are universally seen as growing, the other thing we're noticing is just the time it takes to get a permit, to do the due diligence, to get a permit. And so you're going to have a surge in the desire to build out, running headlong into increased NIMBYism, which you've been reporting on heavily, Dan, and a bottleneck of what I understand is actually a fairly limited pool of environmental due diligence consultancies, which I'm hearing are quite full up, et cetera. So it seems like that's the most immediate bottleneck. I'm interested to see if you all hear that as well.
It's so this is something that I don't think this legislation, I don't think there's much room to address. I mean, the solution to community-based objections is not to have the federal government come up with a mechanism to be able to kind of strong arm communities. That's just a ticket to getting elected officials to make sure the people who did that are no longer in power, I would think. I mean, I think a lot of the community objections are a separate thing that are a major impediment to being able to do build out, but dealing with those is its own separate set of strategies. And I guess I'd be curious what others think, but I just I hear talk at times about, you know, doing figuring out ways to get around local impediments, local objections at the federal level, or basically having somebody from the outside say, yeah, this is just needed, it's going to happen. And everything I've seen from writing about this stuff for a long time indicates to me that that would be shooting ourselves in the foot so hard. It would be a really bad idea.
Tom, what do you think?
I like what Dan said. Well, first of all, you know, part of my job, I cover SVP, I cover ERCOT, then I edit the writer who does MISO. All three of them have interconnection queues for projects that are huge, that, you know, their staffs are unable to deal with. I think ERCOT does a better job than the other two, but they're smaller and they're an island to themselves. You know, I go back to the problems Clean Line Energy had before they went under, and having to work, as Dan said, having to work with landowners, stakeholders. That was one of the problems they had. The other problem they had was, of course, regulatory pushback from red states, Arkansas and Oklahoma. That's still there. And, you know, the wind industry especially, they'll tell you how much money people who lease their land out to these companies earn. I would think that would be, you know, kind of an incentive. But then I get discouraged when, you know, I read like 4 counties in Iowa have decided to not permit any renewables to be built there. I said Iowa, it may have been Indiana or Ohio's Midwestern state. And that's that, you know, that NIMBYism is still around. And that's frustrating, you know, to me as an observer. And I don't know if it's just better messaging needs to be done to try and work with people. But then again, Dan alluded to this, or, you know, you've got different environments, you've got different regulatory commissions you have to deal with. You know, it could be, you have the RTOs you have to go through in some cases. So, you know, and as he said, I can't see the federal government stepping in and saying, this is how it will be done.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have the
Yeah,
American version of the Yellow Jackets, I think, if we try to do that. Now that wouldn't go too well.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, I think the Brookings report's kind of interesting because we as a shop have done a lot of analysis around how the companies that own operating renewable energy farms basically ghost the host community. Once you get it built, they move on, which we have argued pretty strenuously is leaving a lot of public case making on the table. If you grew support, if you curated support, if you showed elected officials that once built, people really like it. They like living around it, which, by the way, the Berkeley National Labs study, it was the definitive study of this, showed that I think people living it, they did a look at people living within 5 miles, 3 miles, 1 mile, and a half mile. 51% of people living within a half mile of a wind farm. So they had a positive or very positive experience. I mean, it's just the arguments from the NIMBYs just don't hold up, even among people who are the wind farm and solar farm neighbors. But I'm also, what I've realized is we don't just have a NIMBY problem, but we have almost a permitting bottleneck, I think, because the permits just take so darn long to get. And I also learned recently, there's a 90% red light response. When you do if you're a developer, you do your due diligence, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be told the site you're looking at, you can't do it. The environmental permitting would be too onerous and too hard to do, which I was really surprised at, even after all the years I've been in this industry. And then what I also understand is there's quite a constraint on the actual numbers of firms that do the due diligence. We're graduating fewer people who do this sort of engineering. There's a set number of firms, and now there's a rush to the door. So the lines are just getting a whole lot longer. And to me, that sets up a delay even before you get to community engagement. It's a pre-permitting problem, whereas community engagement is a post. No, it's also a pre-permitting problem, but it's kind of the one I'm talking about is more upstream, and I just didn't know about it until recently. I'm kind of shocked. And anybody hearing about that stuff as well?
Not necessarily. I'll point out the Texas Commission gets this. They know there's a lot of stranded renewable energy in the state, and so it leads to congestion, high prices at various times because you can't get the wind energy to the population areas. So they don't have a rule making out yet, but they're looking at that. They're kind of taking their time, as sometimes happens in the regulatory arena. That's why part of the reason it takes 6 to 8 years, even longer, to build a transmission line. But they're open to merchant power lines. The Southern Cross is one in Texas that finally is now able to move forward. I think it was first approved in like 2014, 2015 or so. They have a CCN. They don't have an endpoint in the Southeast yet, but they're ready to go. They can export power if they need to. That's intrastate, if I got it right, not interstate. So
Yeah.
Well, actually, it'd be interstate, not intrastate.
Got it.
But I'm not, like you say, I'm not hearing about this lack of talent, of resources to be able to move these permits forward.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I had not heard that either. Because it's these incredibly sophisticated environmental reports. They just magically appear fully formed in the docket. So I have no idea what happens before that. It's just they're all. Don't these guys just snap their fingers and 300 pages of testimony is there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to figure these reports, which I've never read one of them, are definitely a cure for insomnia. But John, are you hearing much about this bottleneck that I'm talking about?
I mean, there's bottlenecks everywhere in this industry, but I think I know Dan was joking a little bit with that last one, but you do hear from the RTOs and ISOs that they don't have the engineers to process a lot of these requests. So I think it goes back to a workforce development problem too, as what did the IRA maybe not address, but wasn't really supposed to address, but it's still a problem that we need to talk about. And I'm assuming we'll get into some FERC stuff later, but interconnection and transmission reform, there's some really positive stuff happening at the federal level that was the only positive when Manchin was throwing us through this roller coaster over the last year. I mean, it was at least FERC was, dedicating time to these very serious issues that are leading to a lot of these bottlenecks. But I do hear about the workforce issue. My company puts on one of the leading utility events for the industry. So we hear from the RTOs, ISOs that they just don't have the people, just like the utilities and just like the renewables developers. Everyone is struggling for talent right now in every industry. And that, I think that shows up a lot in these interconnection queues.
But that's one of the problems SPP faces, and that's why I'm encouraged by the work SPP and MISO are doing together to figure out how, because they're on a seam with each other,
right?
To figure out how they can better build generation that does not continue to clog up their queues. And I just like to see them work together.
And I just want to note that John Engel is showing himself to be a gentleman and a diplomat by saying that Manchin put on a roller coaster. I thought waterboarding was a little bit more of an appropriate analogy for the user experience, but hey, let's go with roller coaster because it's easy to be magnanimous in retrospect. All right, let me go to specific piece of reporting here. John, you recently reported on the solar tax being removed from the Diablo Canyon extension proposals. Tell us more about that. Why do you think that's a big deal? I mean, yes, direction of the California market's big because California is big, but tell us a little bit more on that drill in.
Well, that was kind of an 11th hour announcement by some of the solar advocacy groups that started to raise the red flags and say, this has gotten added in. I don't, we cover a lot of policy, mostly national policy. And once you start drilling down state by state, it gets tough to follow all the blow by blows. Some reports said that the quote unquote tax was thrown in by Newsom at the request of the IOUs. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of that, and we didn't get that far into it. But to what I understand is it was a fee based on the amount of energy you consume, regardless of if it was in front of the meter or behind the meter. So the tax would be in the form of, you have panels on your house and you offset some of your, consumption of what was coming from the grid, but we're still going to charge you based on your total name. And apparently it got pulled with enough outrage in the last minute, and you had so many groups worried about this and saying that it was a way for SDG&E, Southern California Edison, and PG&E to sort of shoehorn in some of the NEM concerns around net metering into this big legislation where nukes would get all of the attention. So it was super complicated. I think in the end, it's dead, but it will speak to the will and might of the solar industry, not just in California, but nationally now. I mean, we saw it with President Biden on tariffs. We can see it was like 10 o'clock at night when I first saw, I think it was Solar Rights Alliance was the first to tweet it out that I saw, that, sound the alarm, call your legislator. We've got a solar tax in the Diablo Canyon bill. And I was like, I don't know about this. And then I saw the AP pick it up, and, you start to give some validity to these things. And just like that, hours later, they're like, we squashed it. That's pretty amazing. That
Yes.
These aren't fringe advocacy efforts anymore, especially in such a climate positive and forward state like California. That's the kind of blowback where, if you have 1 million rooftop solar customers, that's political might against a governor who may have presidential ambitions. So yeah, it was more like interesting to watch from the outside. I wasn't, breaking that story or anything, but certainly an interesting development in the politicking that's taking place in that state. It's just amazing to watch how it's playing out.
Dan, let me ask you about the drill down that you did with ABC News in Ohio. I think caught a lot of people's attention. I'm an Ohioan by upbringing, so it was particularly interesting to me. Tell us, what's your takeaway from that pretty robust stream of reporting?
So this is part of an ongoing series. So there's still parts of it to come out, but ABC News and Inside Climate News are working together to look at some of the challenges of developing a 400 megawatt solar array in Pickaway County, Ohio, a rural region at the very fringes of the Columbus area. And our goal with doing this was to just really get into the community and figure out where does opposition come from? How does opposition grow? How is it kind of born? And what happens to both the opponents and the supporters as a project attempts to move forward? And also kind of what happens with local leaders? Because we see, I think all of us here, we see, there's a big project in some state. There's a big project in Michigan. There's a big project in Indiana, and it's in peril. Okay, how did it get in peril? What happened? And that's what the series kind of seeks to answer. I think there is a tendency in reporting on this, and I'm sure I could find examples I've done that are guilty of this, where we're almost kind of stereotyping the opponents and the supporters of projects, and and when you get deep into it, you find that you kind of both sides are pretty sympathetic when you're actually sitting on their porches and they're explaining kind of why it is they're doing what they're doing. You can very much see where they're coming from, and you also can see some of the errors that developers are making, how they kind of grew this opposition unintentionally. But yeah, I'm hoping that when this is a complete body of work, you can just kind of, this is almost an anthropology of a opposition. We don't know if the project will be rejected or accepted yet. Certainly not looking very good for the project at this moment. But yeah, that's it.
How would you categorize the errors that the developers are making?
I think in this case, and I should say some of this stuff I haven't yet written this. So, but it will be things that will come out later.
No, we're going to break news here on this podcast, Dan. Thank you. I just tell
Yeah.
ABC News that this is a more important platform. They'll understand.
I mean, and I think this happens a lot where just the whole process, the way that going out and getting leases. So you go out and get leases from property owners, and you try to get enough leases signed up that you have a project, and then you tell everyone else. So the project gets announced for the first time to the public, or maybe that announcement is a filing with the regulatory commission. Maybe you do a press release, maybe whatever. But at that point, you've been talking to landowners for sometimes a couple of years. And there are times when there are people who live right across the street or who live really close, sometimes lots of people, 100 houses maybe. And they're just like, wait a minute, my neighbors were talking with this developer for 2 years and I had no idea of this. This is something I'm gonna be looking at, for the rest of my life. And you have this real sense of like, from the person who was not aware of it, this sense of there being this almost duplicity in the community of this. And then keep in mind though, a lot of the other major landowners are aware of it because they were also approached for leases. So it's not like it's a secret, but there's this sense of distrust, this idea that the developers are kind of skulking around. This is kind of the way they have to do it though. Like if they kind of came in the front door and said, hey, we're the developer, there's a whole bunch of developers trying to develop these projects. And one of the things you do by getting a bunch of leases to put together a project is you're getting out in front of the other developers who want to get some of the same prime land. So I understand why they do it that way, but it breeds distrust. And it also, once you feel like the developer is not necessarily being forthright about what they're planning and what the impacts are, it leads to this echo chamber in the community where it's kind of like, oh, I got a bad feeling about this. And you talk to your neighbor, oh, I also got a bad feeling about this. And then you start looking online, I got a bad feeling about solar power. And then Katie barred the door. It's like you're all of a sudden, you're seeing the kind of sum total of these feelings in lots of communities, some of which is fomented by those with, who are up to no good, but some of which is I think just honest residents trying to answer questions for themselves. And so it's what Sarah Mills, who's an academic at the a professor at the University of Michigan, she looks at this very specific issue of kind of community opposition to renewable projects and kind of what animates this. And one of the things she says is that it's almost like you need to have the community conversation first. It's kind of like, okay, we got this giant rural community here. Where would we like renewable energy? This is prime land for renewable energy. Where would we want it? How can we construct this in a way to get maximum benefit for community institutions? Things like that. But it's like the way it actually works with kind of the business imperatives isn't like that at all. So it's like there's just this deep disconnect. Although I think to say deep disconnect, I don't know if I'm mixing metaphors there, but that's, what I mean. But yeah, it's a serious problem that is played out over and over and over again in this country.
Have you heard any local objection beyond Viewshed, which actually holds up? There's a guy that does a lot of reporting platform that we've been involved with in the past, Ray Locker with Checks and Balances Project. He's kind of doing a different take on what you're doing in Michigan. He's looking at what's the aftermath of in communities that he have either accepted or rejected a wind farm. What's left behind? And what the reporting shows is that there's a lot of ill will, people at each other's throats, the bad blood doesn't leave very soon. Second is he's seeing a pattern of almost step and repeat of how you jam up projects. lot of it led by this fellow, Kevin Martis, which many people on my side, so to speak, have spent years wondering if the guy's on the take from the gas industry. I don't know, but anyway, behaves like it. But Dan, in the reporting, have you heard a concern about the effect or the harm it could do to a community beyond viewshed that holds water?
So viewshed is the biggest one. And I think if there was a way to address that through some sort of, I don't know if it's through compensation, I don't know if it's through what, but it's, yeah, and that's the one that is, I don't think there's a counter argument to viewshed. So the other concerns, all of which are at best debatable, maybe at worst largely misplaced. But the other concerns include effects on property values. And if you look into the data on that, it just
doesn't hold up.
It doesn't hold up very well. It's inconclusive. I think there's a lot of reasons to wish that there was more data out there than there is, based on the scale of construction we're seeing these days is so much bigger that the research that exists on property values I don't think is quite adequate. But yeah, you're not going to find good evidence from good research saying that property values are an issue. Also, there are various kind of health concerns, and we've all heard versions of this about the leaching of materials into the ground, again, you're going to have you're going to have a hard time finding reputable sources to say that that's a serious concern, and especially in communities where you've got tons of fertilizer and pesticides and other, to say that having 1,000 acres of solar panels is going to be a greater health hazard than that. That's an argument that will get you a long ways in the community, but it's an argument when you're talking to people who study this stuff. But I mean, remember, it's the argument of the community that often really matters. And I could go on and on, but those are the big ones.
Tom, you had reported recently on the approval of new transmission line that goes from Texas to Mississippi. What are you seeing in that reporting that is worth raising here?
I guess you're referring to Southern Cross. That would be the one that it's about correct me if I don't remember the exact length of it. I think it's about 400 miles, capable of carrying about 2 gig of energy. It would a Texas utility holds the eastern or the western endpoint rather. They've got the CCN for the project. The PUC and ERCOT worked together. Well, really, as ERCOT staff had to address 14 directives from the PUC to prove that it wouldn't cause congestion, it wouldn't harm reliability. 12 other directives. Those were the 2 big ones, really. And like I said earlier, it took 7-8 years just to get to the point to where they can proceed now, but they haven't even gotten into right of way and everything that comes with that. Trying to work with people to go through the various routes. I've seen right now the PUC has 2 or 3 contested cases before landowners opposed to 345 lines going through their ranch property. It's mostly in South Texas. So that's it's just been a complicated process to follow, and it gives me some hope. And Grid United, this was a company founded just last year by Mike Skelly. He was the one behind Clean Line Energy. He's left Lazard to devote full time to this. They want to build a line from the El Paso area out west into New Mexico, again to be able to import energy between ERCOT and the WEC, the Western. Now I can't remember what the E is for. Anyway, it's the kind of the RTO light out west, and it's just encouraging to see people continue to try that. He's a very optimistic person. I've met him several times, and you know, I think he's hopeful.
John Engel, I'm saying on our respective podcasts, we need to do something. I think we need to identify the size of the universe of Michael Skelly fan club, because it's a heavily Texas cohort is what I've noticed, but definitely a Cleantech. We call him an OC, or original Cleantech, right? He's been around for a while and definitely been pushing the transmission boulder up a hill, but somebody's got to power map the whole universe of Skelly fandom. All right, Zach.
Real quickly, he's got a fan on the Texas PUC, Jimmy Glopfeld. He worked at Cleanline, and now he's one of the 5 commissioners.
Nice. Zach, you recently wrote about 1 in 3 Americans live in states with 100% clean energy commitment. Why is that important, short and long term?
Yes, and I mean, one of the things I noted is that that's heavily weighted by California. California's got a big population, and they've got a big commitment. There's 10 states in total, and I would say I got this information from Environment America. They did a good report on it earlier this year. But I think it's just, you know, these markets are very big, slow-moving markets, and they need that. You know, these targets, these commitments are for 2035, 2040, 2045. So a lot of people say, well, what's the point? It's going to transition by that time anyway. But I think just having those clear long-term market signals tell all the different players that are important for growth, this is happening. And some players might already know that, but some players might not, and they need that signal. And also just good messaging is good PR. I think you have to have this kind of ongoing game or challenge or target to keep people motivated, excited, inspired. I think we sometimes forget about that in practical industries like energy industries sometimes perhaps. But, you know, most people, they want to watch sports or something tribal. They want to get behind something or watch a movie with a long-term hero that's going to win in the end. And I think that's sort of what this is about, is just setting a strong narrative and giving a strong signal to every single last player in the market, in the industry. This is going to happen. You may as well start now, you know.
On that point too, Mike, just to add on to what Zach was saying, you know, states like California being a standard bearer for clean energy and climate. I mean, the decisions that happen in California are not just theirs. You saw it this week with Virginia underwent a political transition over the last, year or so from a Democrat governor who was gung-ho about offshore wind to a Republican who questioned the entire nature of the legislation that is leading the charge in the Commonwealth. And then the attorney general says, look out, because our emissions targets are tied to the California, whatever it is, Clean Air Resource Board decision on gas powered vehicles. So what happened in California by that board impacted Virginia's timeline because of previous legislation. So and that kind of stuff, impacts rooftop solar with what they're going through with net metering and all those things. So I think, Zach's point is well taken, that it's a huge impact and it doesn't just concern those 8 states or 10 states or whatever the number was.
I'm not going to make any jokes about the 4th branch of government here in Virginia being Dominion Electric. I will skip that because it's just too easy to do that. But I think, Zach, what you're saying is interesting. As John touched on, David Roberts, I think, he has this 2-part, just almost a stream of consciousness on the Inflation Reduction Act. And one of the points he made, which I thought really was smart, was that this will not only set in motion market dynamics, it will set in motion political dynamics. I'm going to add the word potentially, because I can tell you, like, there's 4 clean economy sectors that we've serviced where their business model, their ability to scale, is almost wholly reliant on their ability to get state, county, or local policymakers blessing their operations. But they are nearly bereft of happy customer stories. They don't bank them as they go. When they really need them, they scramble. I'm not picking on those sectors or the companies in them, but I'm saying that I think, as we've been banging the drum here with our Manchin white paper, that there's a lot of just political block and tackle that these sectors just don't think to do right now. And it will only be through stepping up that game that the political promise of the Inflation Reduction Act can be realized. Because without banking those success stories, without building a base of happy homeowners, you don't get that Newsom last minute change without the juice to move it. And I think it's Julia Piper with Political Climate responding to me on LinkedIn. I raised a question a while back. Is there any elected official anywhere in America, any office, party, geography that's actually politically afraid of crossing the renewable energy industry? Some people said Newsom. I thought, nah, he's ideal. He's a natural, naturally inclined champion. Kind of doesn't count. But she responded and said, DeSantis. Look at DeSantis's veto of the net metering bill, which it was interesting enough of us that Zach hosted my colleague Melissa Baldwin and several other Floridians to actually examine this question, to unpack this question about DeSantis. Zach, I don't want you to get ahead of the posting of that, but I thought it was such an interesting topic, and you hosted the conversation. What was your takeaway on that?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. All of us Floridians, and what I think stood out to me, we had a conservative, a right-wing guy on the call on the webinar who was quite involved in pushing for pro-solar policies among DeSantis and other conservatives. And I think the rest of us on the call were on the progressive side of things, and we were just eager to hear, like, to get more insight into how that might have worked on the right side and on the right wing side. And I think there was a lot to learn there. So I think just the discussion about kind of pressure from the right, from the base on the right, as well as, his point of view is the pressure from the left didn't matter. I mean, it's DeSantis. He gets points for poking the left in the eye. So it was like, but that he might have just gotten enough pressure from the right, or just, following the winds of the population, seeing, oh, this is really popular. If I'm going to run for president, I should be on the pro-solar side of things, because obviously he's going to run for president, and that's really what he's thinking about. But there was also one interesting factor discussed was natural gas prices had risen a lot in Florida, and especially in a region of Florida. And I brought up the point that no matter who's president, and no matter what the cause, if oil prices or gas prices for cars are high, the president goes down a lot in the polls. And even though the president doesn't have that much control over global oil prices. And I think on the state level, I wondered if he saw the pressure from high natural gas prices, high fossil gas prices, maybe as a risk, something to be concerned about, and the option of good rooftop solar policy being an outlet that he supported, being a way sort of out of that, and just easing the pressure that might build up. But yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. I forget how long it was, but a really great crew of very informed people who have been in the industry for 2 decades or more in some cases, and we touched a little bit on how much different the solar industry was 2 decades ago. Solar conference was 2 decades ago to today. Yeah.
All right, we are going to lose John Engel and need to wrap this up in 2.5 minutes here. So I just want to do second to last question, lightning round. Just quick, yes, binary answer. Post IRA, does commercial execution or does policy fulfillment matter more to clean economy scaling? Pick one or the other. John Engel.
I wish I could have gone last on that one. If I had to pick and choose.
You can't satisfy.
No, you know what?
He's complaining about being last. He gets to go first. And
I want to talk more about DeSantis. Honestly, I think that's the more fascinating question. I don't think he cares at all about solar personally. 100,000 rooftops versus 1 million in California. Like, what are we? I don't know. Anyway, I can't wait to watch that panel, Zach, when it comes out. I think it's local policy. I think we still have some stuff to do at the federal level when it comes to the transmission ITC. I think we mentioned that a few times, and facilitating the uptake of all these projects and interconnection queue reform and all things like that. But state and local policy to me is the biggest issue going.
Dan, commercial execution or policy at whatever level? Which matters more to clean economy scaling?
You know, my gut tells me commercial execution, but I guess I'd have to, if I had an hour to think about it, man, I'd give you a really good, but yeah, my gut says.
So you want
commercial
more time too?
These guys are just, you know, you give them an inch, they take a mile. All right. Tom Kleckner.
I think commercial execution would help, but you know, it's going to be local politics, and I say that as someone who lives in a red state surrounded by mostly red states, and that's what I see in the headlines that I get every day.
All right. Zach, last word on
Yeah.
the last question.
It's a hard one, but I'm going policy. And on DeSantis, I'll just say that I brought in some cynicism and thought, I wonder if he just didn't get enough support from the industry that wanted to push that through, and said, hey, I'm not just going to stamp this. Like, maybe give me some more money and next year I'll pass it, you know?
I think it was a poke at Duke a little bit. He said, I'm the guy in charge. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. All right. Well, editors, reporters, thank you. Great roundtable. I wish you all a happy Labor Day. Can I just get
Now back to DeSantis, Zach. I just want to say, no, I'm just kidding, Mike. Sorry.
Zach, when's your episode and DeSantis going to post?
Well, I think today or tomorrow, but I'm not sure when.
Thanks for giving us the really high interest zone for that. I really appreciate that. That's great. All right. The Friday before Labor Day. What's not to like? All right. Who's going to RE plus? Could this quick round, show of hands? John Engel, Dan, no? Tom?
No, sorry.
Zach?
What's that?
It's RE plus in the East, right? Someone from the East will be there.
RE plus in Anaheim. You going or no?
Oh, it'd be less.
Oh, no, we have someone else will be there for us, but yeah.
All right. Clean Technical represented. All right. Thank you all. We so appreciate it. Great roundtable. We're going to write this up, but great discussion. Thanks so much, gentlemen. We appreciate you joining.
Yep, thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Take
Mike.
care. Bye now.